meeting is to order here. It's the Rules, Chambers, Intergovernmental Relations and Strategy Committee meeting, scheduled for 5:30. We were trying to give a little bit of time for Mr. Garidi, but we've got a quorum anyhow, so. Mr. Hanlon.
Okay,
I guess
the first, it's just a draft resolution that establishes a committee to review procedures and issues related to the city charter. This one hasn't been introduced.
Mike's not on.
Mike's not on, Mike. I'm sorry.
Mike's mic isn't on.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is a draft resolution to set up an advisory task force to review the charter.
And I guess as a procedural question, maybe for our solicitor, do we need to read this resolution into the record, or is it the paper document itself good?
I think the paper document itself would be good. I mean, it could be.
Good.
I think the copies were made available for the public to look at. It's online, it's posted, so it could be considered.
Okay, well then we'll open it up for discussion. We'll start up here with council members, and then we'll go to the public. All right, then I'll start. Yeah, I think it's due. I think there's some things in there that need to be looked at and possibly updated and some possibly changed. So I think the only way we're going to know that is to look at it and see, take input, and go from there. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question on, do we have an idea of the process of how members will be selected, or is that still under consideration?
I think what we're going to do is take testimony in open council chambers, just like to hear different input from council members and hear input from the public.
I'm saying now how the committee members will be chosen. Is it just going to be from council?
Council.
So it's just a council committee?
It's going to be a council
Okay.
committee, yes. You want to be on? You volunteering?
I'm absolutely volunteering. I had a misinterpretation. I thought we were going to include members of the general public on the committee itself. So that was my question, but if it's just a council committee, absolutely, I'd like to be on it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I guess, I mean, another question, I hate to keep throwing these questions at you here, Matt, but what, I mean, if all members of council wanted to be on it, that could be a committee?
Yeah, it's your discretion in assigning the committee membership.
Okay.
Who would be on the committee, and so it's up to the president.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Sure. Mr. Hendricks?
No, I don't have it, thanks.
All right, we'll open it up to the public. Any comments, input from the public on the resolution, unnumbered resolution, right? The home rule charter.
Yeah, it was never introduced.
Okay.
Hi,
Okay.
this thing on, can you hear me?
Green light.
How about now, can you hear me now? Okay, good. Lou Shue, 625 North 6th Street.
Okay.
No, it was, long story short, while I agree with the need to revisit the charter, there's a lot of things that even most people don't know about yet. As word gets out about this charter commission, a lot of people are going to be coming up with ideas. I admin a group called Let's Build a New Allentown Together on Facebook. I co-admin it with Robert Trotner. And for the past couple of months, we've had a little poll along the top there. It would be my intention to report on that, and ideally I'd like to request membership on this committee. Now that might be a bit of a challenge if I'm not a sitting council member, but on the other hand, if there were members of the community invited, various lawyers, various activists, we're going to need at least one lawyer, you're right about that, but the more populated, so to speak, with community members, I think it would be a far easier task to sell this to the voters at large. Thank you.
John Sicker?
Glenn Sicker, South Allentown. What's the time frame to start this? Is one question I have. Is this, we're starting tonight, I know, but are we trying to make some milestones like in the next month or two, do something monthly, every 2 months? I mean, do we have an idea where we're going here yet?
No, I mean, we don't want to jump to any conclusions here either. We want to have well thought out ideas, processes here. And that's why we want to open it up to the public so we can have people come up and.
Okay. I sort of take a different view than the person up here before in that making this too broad, sometimes you don't get anywhere. So I think there should be consideration on the scope of this whole agenda as far as doing the charter. I know it has to be reviewed, but you might have to do this in steps. Basically, what you want to tackle first and what the major portions of it are. Maybe you have to facilitate a meeting and says, hey, here's our top priorities. Or let everybody come in and say, here's what we should do, and then council, whoever the committee is, comes back and says, pick out the top priorities. Because it's going to be tougher. But maybe you want to tackle the whole thing. But doing a re-charter examination is an important thing to do. So we want to get the most input, but at the same time, keep it consolidated so you can do something within the next year or two. Because it's going to take time. And
we agree.
And then try to get everybody together. So I just wanted to say a few things. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Helen Hahn, 2016 East Highland Street, Allentown. This is a great idea, and it's nice that you're opening it up. The charter should be read by council, by anyone who's interested in city. But the problem that I think is going to happen is you have to make it so that there won't be any interpretations. Because what recently happened with our charter is two solicitors or two people that are lawyers interpreted, two different ways. I don't understand. Can you help me out? How could that be possible? How could the words that are written in stone, that this is the way it's going to be interpreted two different ways? Doesn't make sense.
Having been involved in the judicial system for many years, it doesn't make sense, but it happens every day. It happens every day.
That doesn't make it right. That's our problem.
I'm not saying it makes it right, but maybe just that subject you're looking at, when we look at that, maybe another sentence or two added onto there to clarify might be just enough so that you don't get two separate opinions. One of the reasons we want to look at things.
Therefore, you're agreeing that you need the wording to be so specific, get that, or specific words, that it will not be open to interpretation. What's the sense of writing something that you can say, by the way, I don't like it that way this time, I'll make it this way. And then the next person that comes through, we don't like it that way, we'll change it, we'll make it that way. That doesn't make sense to me. It's supposed to be a document that is written to follow, and that's the way it has to be. How do we get to that point?
That's one of the reasons we're opening this up. That's one of the reasons we're going to have these hearings, and we're going to have all kinds of input from the public, whether they be attorneys, professors, the general public.
That sounds great. Hope it happens.
We hope so too. You know, Mr. Hanlon, we're going to have to come up with a rule with families here.
It's called teamwork.
Go ahead.
I also live at the same address. My question is, can we break it down into changes and non-changes? So if it has to go to the public for a referendum, we separate those that have to be voted on and those in the charter that don't have to be voted on. And I was thinking it would be much easier to break it out on the ones that really need to be corrected. In other words, as I reviewed the charter and looked at some of them, there's some that are really important to us, and is there a way that we can have a list or send out a list asking the people, read the charter and tell us which ones you're unhappy with. The public brings it in, we write the list down, oh, so many want this one, so many want that one, and those that pertain to the voting should take priority over the ones that don't have to go to the citizens for a vote that's important, and maybe another election will cover those, but the few that really mean something could be done. So that's my suggestion as to another point of how we can have meetings, discuss, and not necessarily a council. I was thinking a public session that in the charter says that we could have, where we would just discuss this on an open forum and give the person more than 3 minutes, to talk about it or give their point of view. And as long as it was in the realm of what's going on, and then that way we would get more information.
Agreed. And I think that goes to what Mr. Hunsaker said about prioritizing, so
That would be
prioritizing and getting input from people out there.
Because you can see that with tonight's crowd, it's really an interesting subject.
Council President McLean, may I just say a few things just
Absolutely.
connected with this? With the Home Rule Charter, with the establishment of a committee under the rules of council, there's a 6-month period of time for the committee, and it can be reestablished as necessary. So that builds in a limitation of time or an incentive to move forward with it. But it also gives council the authority to continue the length of the committee if necessary. The other is, just in mentioning about the Home Rule Charter, there are limitations in what could be discussed, but this can't be something that would be proposals to change the form of government would not be something that council would be able to do at this point. There's a different process that would need to be done for that, and that's established by the Home Rule and Optional Planned Government law that's out there. So it's not talking about, this couldn't get into changes to the form of government, but it can get into looking into the terms of the Home Rule Charter and trying to evaluate ambiguities and come up with proposals to change those. Those would be an appropriate sort of avenue to look into, and I think the resolution identifies a list of potential topics that council is considering to look into as to that point. But just want to make clear that in talking with the Home Rule Charter here, it's not talking about changing the form of government. And I think in some of those, that does talk about having separate open forums. Here, the discussions would be in the context of the committee meetings that would be held by the committee, or if whatever other action the committee would decide to take. But it's still, while it can cover many different topics within the Home Rule Charter, it is still a limited sort of committee in terms of what it can do. It can't go into discussing changing the form of government.
Thank you very much, and I think you're doing a fine job of talking yourself into being the solicitor for this committee. That's why we need you here.
One more bite, since you brought up something.
Only because it's you and because there's such,
right,
the crowd's pretty
sure.
large, so mine has to limit it.
I'll only talk 10 seconds. Is there any examples, could you, in this forum, could we limit some of the powers of the mayor in this particular aspect, where right now he can write almost any contract he wants? Is there limitations in those areas that he would have to maybe come to council for these things? Or I'm just trying to get a list of what you were saying, is we don't want to change the form of government, but you can, but not in this form.
Yeah, without going into the specifics of what could be done or what could be, there are, if it's currently goes with the structure of government as we have it, and it's just modifying different components of what's already in the Home Rule Charter, and not changing the organization, the structure, different sorts of positions, potentially much can be looked into. I really would have to look on a case by case.
I didn't want to work on something that you're going to say, hey, I spent all this time, I know you say, no, you can't do this. So I'm just thinking, if we would try to present a case study where the mayor doesn't have all these powers without oversight.
Yeah.
Right now, he writes all these things, says, hey, and 2 weeks later you find out he did this.
I think, looking at what the Home Rule Charter itself says, and the way that it structures the government. If it's as a rule of thumb, if it's shifting responsibility, no. If it's shifting responsibilities or modifying responsibilities in terms of positions that are currently there, that's potentially something that it's potential, have to look at the details, have to look at the.
Case in point is MOUs. Basically, that happened with the water and sewer 5-6 years ago. He passed MOUs, which nobody really knew about until 3 years later when we said, hey, what about these MOUs, which he passed in October of 13. The contract was signed in August of 13. He also passed an MOU with LCA in March, and nobody really knew about it. But if the mayor was required, if he wants to have an MOU, it's all right for them to come up with, but at the same token, he'd have to bring that out to the full council for review and approval. I mean, they're doing things on a one-man basis. That's the problem I see. Years ago, we didn't think of that. We had different types of mayors, where we didn't have to worry about somebody going.
Yeah, I mean, it would come back to whatever proposal would be, looking at it, you have to see the terms of the proposal and evaluate it, and put it in that context.
Yeah.
But you need to see the details, I guess, to be able to really sort out.
It'll be interesting as this expands.
Okay.
Mr. President, may I ask a question, Mr. Pfeiffer?
Sure.
And this is actually for the committee as a whole. Mr. Pfeiffer, would it be possible to perhaps put together with some research a rough memo of basically boundaries of what this committee can do and what it can't do? So to Mr. Hunsaker's point, we don't spend a lot of time investigating something only to find out, oh wait, you can't do that. Is that possible, something that we could have provided before this committee starts its operations?
Sure, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Anybody else from the public?
Yeah, I'm gonna be Robert Trotter, 1910 Mayor Street, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I want to say about 4 things real quick. Number 1, this is incredible that you're working this fast. I'm proud to have been a citizen of Allentown when I see something like this so fast. And a lot of people are trying to put the cart before the horse. The structure is going to be determined as the thing goes forward. But this is going to include including without limitation members of the public, outside organizations, elected officials, representatives from city offices, which I think is wonderful, and it goes to Courtney's point to a certain extent. And I'm just incredibly proud of this. And it's going to start within 30 days, which is good, and the structure will develop as time goes on, depending on the need. Now, we can limit, as Darrell knows, we can limit the amount, what the mayor can sign off on. We can put that back, that RPDs, we can put that back to 0, because we put it down to $40,000 before, so we've certainly reduced it to 0. The MOUs, I don't know, but we've done that before, and there probably should be more control of the contract. And I'm no longer the administrator of Let's Build the New Allentown. Lou is the administrator and organizer of the group, and I second the motion that I hope he's on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public? Seeing nobody. I guess we need a motion. Do we need a motion to move this to full council or not?
It's not really a resolution. Yeah, it is just a draft. A draft of you.
Okay. Well then.
It's a resolution.
Good, a sense of the council, since it hasn't been formally presented to council and then sent down to this committee, but a sense of the council is how to proceed with it.
Maybe wait for Mr. Clever to do the memo as to what's in bounds and out of bounds before we do a formal resolution, if that's possible.
Okay, I know he has other things to do, but I'd like to get it done as soon as possible so we can move forward.
For whoever this list
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah.
I just move forward a recommendation to appoint a committee, and that becomes the resolution at the next council meeting.
Okay, that's why I was looking over to you. You've been here. Been here, done that. So we need a motion on the floor.
Is this
from you?
Oh,
Good.
I'll make the motion to move forward to full body council. So, am I saying this right? Right?
Okay, motion to move to the full body resolution to appoint a committee.
To appoint a committee.
I will second that.
Okay. All said aye?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye, aye, aye.
Okay, now we can go to our 144.
And this thing has been introduced, and this thing is a resolution that had been introduced a while ago that supports setting up a working advisory group to look at and make recommendations to council and the administration on an open government portal, data portal.
Okay, and that, we have the resolution. I'll open it up to council. Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I understand this correctly, this would actually almost be establishing a board that is solely appointed by council, correct?
I think the thought was is that you do with this what you just did with the Charter Review Committee, and you set up a committee of council to do the same thing.
This is one where this is my thought. Since we're looking at this being a working committee that regularly reports back and has the regular meetings and also is looking at open data, this one I specifically think we should include members of the public. And I actually think this wouldn't be a bad idea to set this up as a board. Actually do it by ordinance and set this up as a board which council appoints. I would flip this. Council appoints the majority of the members, and we do ask the administration for some people to be appointed, basically flipping the formula that's used for the Environmental Advisory Commission. But my reason for stating that is because this specifically is something where having people who work in the IT industry outside of the city to focus on these issues, because the ways to keep data open and also to protect data change so quickly that I think that having this be a citizen board or commission would be a better idea than actually appointing it as a committee of council. Put members of council on it, similar to what we do with some of the other boards, but I think that this is something where we would be better served to have the public serve on this than just members of council. That's my thought. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Anybody else from members of council? Open it up to the public.
No, I just want to say real quickly, this parallels the other motion. It says the working group may include in or interface with any, first of all, it's in consultation with the mayor, so it's not just council.
No, that's
All right, and then it will interface with any members the council so it seems appropriate with the mayor, including without limitation members of public council organization, elected officials, representatives of the city. I think that's what you just said.
Well, what I'm talking about is instead of establishing this just as a committee of council, like the finance committee, the CED committee, establishing it more like the Environmental Advisory Commission or the Zoning Hearing Board or the Historic Architectural Review Board, where members of the general public are appointed to the board to advise the city, council specifically and the mayor as well, on best ways to have open data. Because I think that it's more appropriate to have citizens make these, this is my opinion, to have citizens make these recommendations than the people who are responsible for the data.
Then you want to amend the resolution.
That's my suggestion, is to actually make this into an ordinance establishing this as a board, a separate board, where we would take applications and appoint members. They would meet regularly, not just a council committee that has a 6-month shelf life on it, but something that we create in perpetuity. That's my argument.
Okay, I just think the important thing is to move on these as fast as possible, and I think what you're saying is accomplished with this, and if we do a ordinance by the board and stuff, that's going to delay things. I think the important thing is to move as fast as possible.
My point in this, though, is that because of the fact that IT technology changes so quickly, that having this be permanent and not just go away in 6 months is more important to me, and having members of the public involved in it.
So we have an ad hoc committee now, and then we have a permanent committee later.
Well, I'm not suggesting we can't do that. I'm just saying that I think that this is better served by making this a citizen commission as opposed to a council committee.
Okay, I got you, thank you. Go ahead.
So I was going to think maybe that's the recommendation.
I'll explain in a moment, but he's right.
No,
he's not. He's advocating for Jet Man. You never forget that. He's right. Oh, yeah. No, I understand.
Data company A over on this side and data company B on this side, and
They can apply.
Budding
There's
heads.
no.
Well, and that's sort of why I'm suggesting doing it this way. I mean, where we have an independent commission, board, however you want to refer to this, where this isn't members of council who, if a contract comes up theoretically, this is simply a matter of, these are people who have an interest in open government and open data and regularly are meeting to make recommendations to the administration and council as to ways to keep our open data policy relevant and safe and moving forward. I would argue, I mean, for myself, I'm certainly not an expert in IT. I'm not even close to it. I'm lucky that I can turn my cell phone on. So I'm just saying that I think finding people who have expertise in this field, similar to how we do with zoning or planning or environmental advisory, and creating this as a long-term advisory board, we would be better served, and future councils and future mayors would be better served by that. That's my argument.
Everyone, Mr. Hunsaker, to have to stand there too long, but this should not be technology. That should be something that's internal, the technology, because we just spent over $1 million to fix the snafu that got through. So that's something that should be left with the IT people. I see this as being out on the computer, so one here can sit at his computer at home at night and look at the purchases or look at the same stuff that we get. Look at the budget and see what's left. I don't know, an even spreadsheet. I don't know exactly how that form would take.
Right. Well, but my argument is I'm saying that the citizens would get to determine how that data is presented to them. We create a board that recommends to the city, here's a new way that we could present the data. We've been doing it this way for 5 years, but here's a new way to do it that we investigate and vet out. That's what I'm saying.
And I agree, but the technology end of it, the security technology end would remain with the security, with the IT.
I'm simply saying that this committee would make recommendations to
Right.
council and the administration about best ways to do it. Because I can tell you, our IT professionals are focused on their day-to-day job. They're not focused on, oh, hey, here's a new idea that just popped up and, we don't have enough staff. If we had twice the staff, then you could have people focused on new and emerging technologies. But people who work in the private sector in the tech industry are going to be paying a lot more attention to emerging technologies and open data platforms than people who are focused every day on making sure that the traffic system is operating properly. That's my argument, Mr. Chairman.
And I agree, but we have sister cities that have this in place, so rather than reinvent the wheel.
If I may, Mr. President.